In 1973, a script landed at NBC that left executives unsettled in a way almost nothing else had before. This wasn't another elegant Columbo mystery where a smug killer underestimated a rumpled detective. It was darker, stranger, more dangerous. At least, that was the public excuse. For decades, fans were told an unusual Columbo episode was abandoned simply because it was too disturbing for television, too experimental, too risky for primetime. But that explanation was never the whole story, because buried inside that script was something far more troubling than violence. It challenged the formula of the show itself. It mocked celebrity culture. It blurred murder, performance, and madness so boldly that some believed airing it could have changed Columbo forever. And that is exactly why many believe it was buried. For 50 years, the episode was treated almost like a rumor, whispered about in collector circles, mentioned in old interviews, then dismissed as myth. But it was real, and its story reveals something even stranger about Columbo itself. Because long before this forbidden episode existed, the entire show was already breaking rules no detective series was supposed to break. And it all started during a crisis. Back in the early 1960s, Hollywood had ground nearly to a halt during a writer's strike. Production stalled, writers scrambled for work, and two struggling screenwriters, Richard Levinson and William Link, were desperate enough to try something unconventional. They found a loophole. Live television productions were exempt from some strike restrictions. So, in a rush, almost out of survival, they wrote a murder story for NBC. It was hurried, improvised, almost accidental. And from that chaos emerged a detective no one expected would become legendary. Lieutenant Columbo. He didn't resemble television heroes of the era. No polished charisma. No glamorous suits. No gunslinging confidence. He looked tired, distracted, ordinary, but behind the wrinkled raincoat was a mind sharper than anyone around him realized, and even the structure of the show broke tradition. Most mysteries ask, who committed the crime? Columbo gave away the killer in the opening minutes. The mystery became something far more satisfying. How does this shabby detective dismantle a perfect crime? It was genius disguised as simplicity. And networks hated the idea. Executives reportedly believed revealing the murderer up front would kill suspense. Instead, it created a new kind of suspense, a psychological chess match, and audiences couldn't get enough. But even Columbo himself was almost very different. Peter Falk wasn't the first choice. Lee J. Cobb passed. Bing Crosby passed. Only after others walked away did Falk inherit the role. And in doing so, he transformed television. Much of Columbo's identity wasn't scripted. The raincoat? Falk bought it himself. The scuffed shoes? His own. The disheveled style? Deliberate. He built Columbo from scraps. And then there was that famous line, just one more thing. It feels so perfect people assume it was carefully invented. It wasn't. It reportedly emerged as a last-minute patch to extend a scene. A throwaway fix. That became iconic. That was Columbo's magic. Accidents became legend. Even the detective's first name became part of the mystery. Fans debated it for decades. Frank? Philip? Nothing was ever definitive. The creators liked it that way. Columbo wasn't supposed to be fully knowable. He was meant to feel almost mythic. A man who wandered into rooms looking confused while quietly dismantling geniuses. And he always seemed to target the same people, the powerful, the rich, the arrogant. Murderers in Columbo weren't usually desperate criminals. They were surgeons, directors, politicians, millionaires, people convinced they were too sophisticated to be caught. And Columbo made them underestimate him. That was the trap. He didn't overpower criminals. He irritated them into exposing themselves. A forgotten receipt, a misplaced bottle, a contradiction, death by tiny details, and audiences loved seeing privilege undone by a man in a wrinkled coat. That formula made Columbo a phenomenon. Soon it wasn't just successful. It was global. In country after country, Viewers embraced this strange detective who never fired guns or chased suspects through explosions. He simply thought, patiently, relentlessly, and yet, for all its brilliance, the show almost changed forever in 1973, because that's when Brian De Palma entered the story. At the time, De Palma was rising fast, already known for darker Hitchcock-inspired work. He wasn't supposed to be writing television mysteries, yet something about Columbo intrigued him. So he teamed with critic Jay Cox and created something unlike any episode before it. And it terrified executives. The script centered on an experimental filmmaker named Quentin Lee, but Murderer barely describes him. He viewed killing as art, performance, philosophy. He didn't kill for money or revenge. He committed murder as an artistic statement. Already, that alone was alien territory for Columbo. But then the script went further. Lee secretly films the murder, turns the crime into a documentary, and most bizarrely, makes Columbo part of the film without the detective realizing it. Now the detective isn't just solving a crime. He's inside an artwork built around murder. It was meta before television used the word. Reality and fiction folding into each other. And for 1973, that was radical. Some felt too radical. The script even introduced film students following Columbo with cameras, one jokingly named after Spielberg. It flirted with satire, fourth wall cracks, psychological horror, and something else Columbo rarely touched, a villain who kills for pure intellectual vanity. No greed, no jealousy, no relatable motive, just cold artistic obsession. Some producers admired the brilliance. Others reportedly thought audiences would reject it entirely, or worse, be disturbed by what it implied. Because this wasn't just another killer. It was murder as spectacle. Sound familiar? Decades before media obsession with violence became cultural debate, the script was already poking at it. And maybe that was part of the problem. Officially, production issues and complexity doomed it. But fans have long suspected something deeper. That the script exposed themes television didn't want touched. Celebrity emptiness. Violence as entertainment, voyeurism, performance culture. In hindsight, it feels eerily ahead of its time, and maybe that's why it disappeared. Yet fragments survived, ideas from the script reportedly echoed in later episodes, pieces repurposed, ghosts of a lost masterpiece, which only made the mystery grow. What if the greatest Columbo episode was the one nobody saw? That question haunted fans for decades. Especially because the series itself eventually began drifting into strange territory anyway. Years later, some episodes pushed so far from classic Columbo they shocked viewers. There was the infamous kidnapping episode that felt more like a thriller than detective fiction. Columbo carrying guns, shootouts, chaos. Fans hated it. Then came surreal psychological experiments, dream symbolism, bizarre symbolism, even rave nightclub murder mysteries in the 2000s. By then, some wondered whether the show had become stranger than the Barry De Palma script ever was, which makes the rejection even more ironic. The episode, once considered too unusual, might have fit right into later Columbo, but perhaps in 1973, it arrived too early. And timing changes everything. Peter Falk understood timing better than anyone. He protected Columbo fiercely, rejected casting ideas, fought networks, resisted formula changes, because he knew the character only worked if audiences underestimated him. Change too much, and you break the spell. That may be why the Buried script fascinates people still. It represents the road not taken. A darker evolution Columbo almost embraced, and perhaps should have, yet even that wasn't the last great mystery surrounding the detective. Years after the series seemed over, one final case almost brought Falk back. A true farewell. By 2007, plans quietly emerged for what many thought would be the final Columbo. Not another revival. A conclusion. A send-off. The script reportedly existed. Over 100 pages. a modern murder involving sound technology and psychological clues. Classic Columbo. Fresh, but true to roots. There was even talk of celebrity cameos. It felt real. Fans never knew how close it came. Then the project stalled. Executives reportedly doubted audiences wanted an 80-year-old lead detective. The logic felt brutal and deeply ironic because audiences had never watched Columbo for youth. They watched for mind, presence, character. But television often fears age, and the project faded. Then tragedy made sure it never returned. Peter Falk's health declined, memory slipped, Alzheimer's advanced, and in one of the cruelest ironies imaginable, the man who played television's greatest detective began losing memory itself. Eventually, those close to him said Falk no longer remembered being Columbo. Pause on that. It feels impossible. The actor who built a character around remembering every tiny clue, forgetting the role entirely. Heartbreaking doesn't cover it. The final case was abandoned, never filmed. Another lost Columbo, mystery, another ghost episode. And suddenly, the buried 1973 script wasn't the only phantom haunting the series. There were two unwritten endings, two missing cases, two mysteries that never reached audiences. Maybe that's fitting, because Columbo was always about unfinished certainty, loose threads, one more question, one more thing. Even Peter Falk seemed inseparable from that spirit. His performance never relied on dominance. It was humility weaponized. He shuffled, mumbled, distracted suspects with nonsense, then quietly destroyed them. No detective before or since has really duplicated it. Many copied the formula. None captured the alchemy, which is why the lost episode matters. It isn't just trivia. It hints at how much more Columbo might have become. A darker show, a stranger show, maybe an even greater one. Imagine if De Palma's episode had aired. Would it have changed television mysteries? Influenced psychological thrillers earlier? Pushed Columbo into new artistic territory? We'll never know. And maybe not knowing is part of its power. Mysteries unsolved linger longest. That buried script became one. So did Columbo's unmade last case. Even the detective's first name became one. For a show about solving mysteries, it left behind remarkable unanswered questions. And perhaps that is its final trick. Even after decades, Columbo still has one more mystery. The one television never let us see. Maybe NBC buried the episode because it was too dark. Maybe production logistics killed it. Maybe the conspiracy is exaggerated. Or maybe the script simply revealed something uncomfortable. That beneath Columbo's cozy formula lurked something far more dangerous. A detective show capable of becoming art house nightmare. A murder mystery willing to question spectators themselves. And perhaps that was too much. Because if the audience becomes implicated, if watching crime becomes part of the crime, then the show stops being comfort. It becomes accusation. That's dangerous television, especially in 1973, and maybe impossible to air. Yet somehow, that makes the episode feel more alive than if it had aired. Because lost stories become legends, and legends grow. For decades, fans thought they knew every Columbo case, every suspect, every trick, every just one more thing. But hidden in the archives was a case even Columbo never got to solve. A murder mystery erased before the detective could arrive. Maybe that's why people still obsess over it. Because it feels unfinished. And unfinished stories haunt us. Peter Falk once made audiences believe truth always reveals itself eventually. No matter how clever the criminal, no matter how perfect the cover-up, Columbo always found the crack. The tiny overlooked clue, the loose thread, and perhaps the buried episode is that loose thread in television history. Pulled long enough, it reveals something bigger, about censorship, creativity, fear, and the stories networks decide audiences can't handle. That may be the real mystery, not whether the episode was buried, but why forgotten stories keep resurfacing, demanding to be solved, and after 50 years, this one still refuses to disappear. Because somewhere in television history, there remains a Columbo case with no final confrontation, no confession, no gotcha ending, only questions, and somehow, that may be the most perfect Columbo mystery of all.